June 6, 1944. Nearly 7,000 vessels crossed the English Channel, the largest amphibious armada ever assembled, bound for Normandy. Before nightfall, over 4,000 Allied soldiers, American, British and Canadian, would give their lives to crack open Fortress Europe. But this colossal gamble rested on a single weather forecast and a deception so audacious it held an entire German army waiting for an invasion that never came. The plan bore a single name: Operation Overlord. Its purpose was clear: to breach Hitler's Atlantic Wall and open the road to liberate Western Europe. The authority for this colossal undertaking rested with General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Eisenhower's headquarters in England became the nerve centre for a coalition of American, British, Canadian, Australian and other Allied forces. Every decision, every order, carried the weight of millions of lives and the hopes of occupied nations. Eisenhower's words, broadcast to the assembled troops on June 6th, cut through the uncertainty. He said, "You are about to embark upon the great crusade, toward which we have striven these many months." That morning, the entire invasion hung on a single forecast. Group Captain James Stagg, Chief Meteorologist for the Royal Air Force, faced Eisenhower and his commanders in a tense briefing just after midnight on June 4th. Stagg reported a brief break in the storms, just enough time for the Armada to cross the Channel. Eisenhower listened, weighed the risks, and gave the final order. He said, "OK, let's go." Normandy was not the obvious choice. The Pas-de-Calais was closer to England and more heavily defended. But Allied planners saw opportunity in Normandy's wide, gently sloping beaches and the chance to surprise the enemy. The decision was shaped by months of debate, intelligence reports, and the need to secure a deep water port at Cherbourg. Yet even the most careful planning could not prevent tragedy. In April, Exercise Tiger, a full-scale rehearsal at Slapton Sands, ended in disaster when German E-boats attacked the convoy, killing 749 American soldiers. The loss forced a hard look at communication failures and landing protocols. Lessons from that night were written into the final invasion orders, tightening discipline and coordination for the real assault. By the dawn of June 5th, the timetable was locked. The fleet would sail under cover of darkness, with airborne troops landing ahead of the main force. Eisenhower's gamble, shaped by weather, geography, and the bitter lessons of rehearsal, would soon be put to the ultimate test. A phantom army gathered in the fields of Kent, tents, vehicles, and tanks that were little more than painted canvas and plywood. Yet to German eyes, the 1st United States Army Group was real, its radio operators weaving a tapestry of coded chatter that filled the airwaves with false orders and logistical queries. Operation Fortitude South, the linchpin of Allied deception, convinced German intelligence that the main blow would fall at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The ruse was so convincing that Field Marshal von Rundstedt, overseeing the Western Front, kept his strongest reserves, 2 panzer divisions, far from the actual invasion beaches. Behind the lines, the Atlantic Wall stretched along the French coast, a patchwork of concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, and beach obstacles. Rommel, tasked by Hitler to make the coast impregnable, ordered thousands of steel hedgehogs, Czech hedgehogs, and mines to be embedded in the sand and surf. Engineers poured thousands of tons of concrete into gun casemates, while anti-tank ditches and barbed wire snaked across every approach. Yet even Rommel's urgency could not mask the flaws. Stretches of the wall remained unfinished, and the defenders were spread thin. The German command structure bristled with friction. Rommel pressed for immediate armoured counterattacks, but Hitler insisted that panzer reserves could not move without his explicit order. On the morning of June 6th, while Allied paratroopers already fought behind the lines and landing craft neared the shore, requests for tank deployment stalled in Berlin. Only late in the morning did Hitler authorise the release of armoured divisions, precious hours after the first Allied troops had landed. By then, the Atlantic Wall was no longer a barrier but a gauntlet, its obstacles slowing the invaders but failing to stop them. The deception had held, and the walls, for all their menace, would face the full weight of the Allied assault. Midnight over Normandy brought the steady drone of C-47s slicing through the darkness. The first to leap were the Pathfinders, small teams from the 101st and the 82nd Airborne, tasked with marking drop zones for the thousands who would follow. They carried Eureka beacons, their only link in the blackness, and as they landed, they fanned out to set up signals, mindful that a wrong marker could scatter entire regiments. Behind them, waves of paratroopers filled the sky. Strong winds and thick cloud banks pushed planes off course. Instead of precise landings, men and equipment rained down across hedgerows, flooded fields, and enemy-held villages. Some units landed miles from their intended targets. Others found themselves alone, forced to improvise in the darkness. In the Cotentin Peninsula, the 101st Airborne's mission was clear: secure the causeways leading off Utah Beach and block German reinforcements. Scattered companies set up hasty roadblocks using whatever they could find, from felled trees to commandeered carts. Radios crackled with confused reports as officers tried to regroup their men. The 82nd Airborne, dropped east of Sainte-Mère-Église, fought to seize key crossroads and hold the town. Private John Steele, caught on the church steeple by his parachute, became an unwitting witness to the chaos below as firefights erupted in the streets. To the east, British 6th Airborne Division's gliders skimmed low over the Orne River. At 26 minutes past midnight, Major John Howard's men stormed Pegasus Bridge, overwhelming the defenders in minutes and holding fast against counterattacks. The bridge, intact and in Allied hands before dawn, would block German armour from reaching the beaches. Across the drop zones, the fight had begun. The first blows of D-Day struck not on sand, but in the tangled fields and villages behind enemy lines. At 2:45, the thunder of naval guns shattered the calm off Normandy. Warships unleashed a rolling barrage targeting concrete bunkers, gun emplacements, and barbed wire entanglements along 50 miles of coast. The barrage was relentless. Minutes of fire, then a pause, then another salvo, each time to clear a path for the landing craft already churning through the surf. Destroyer captains stood on open bridges, reading the beach sectors by codename, Utah and Omaha for the Americans to the west, Gold and Sword for the British, and Juno for the Canadians in the centre. Each beach had its own obstacles: mines, steel hedgehogs, wooden stakes, mapped by engineers and marked for demolition teams who would land in the first waves. As the sky began to lighten, thousands of landing craft surged toward shore. At 6:30, the ramps dropped on Utah and Omaha. On Utah, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. stepped into waist-deep water, rallying his men after a current carried them south of their intended landing point. They pressed inland, bypassing flooded fields and linking with scattered paratroopers. On Omaha, the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions met a storm of machine gun fire. Many craft never made it to the sand. Officers like Lieutenant John Spaulding led survivors through gaps in the wire, forging a foothold under the cliffs. To the east, British forces hit Gold at 7:25, Sword at 7:30, and the Canadians struck Juno minutes later. Tanks rolled straight from landing ships supporting infantry as they pushed through beach obstacles and minefields. Engineers under fire cleared lanes for the following waves. By mid-morning, the Allies had landed on every beach, each sector etched with its own stories of chaos, courage, and sacrifice. The invasion was underway. The fate of Europe now rested on the sand and surf of Normandy. Omaha. Beach, just after dawn, men of the US 1st and 29th Divisions pressed forward into a wall of gunfire. The tide ran red against steel obstacles and barbed wire, while German machine guns swept the sand from concrete bunkers on the bluff above. UN-62 and WN-61, two of the strongest points in the German grid, poured fire onto the landing craft as ramps dropped. Lieutenant John Spaulding led his men through a gap in the wire, crawling over bodies and shattered equipment. Medics worked in the open, dragging wounded to the shelter of beach obstacles, their armbands bright against the sand. One survivor remembered that the water was full of men, some dead, some shouting, some just silent. At Pointe du Hoc, the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions faced a sheer 100-foot cliff. Under fire, They fired rocket-propelled ladders and began to climb, hand over hand, as grenades and stones rained down. By 7:45, the first Rangers reached the top, only to find the massive German guns had been moved. Small patrols searched inland and discovered the guns hidden under camouflage, ready to strike at Utah and Omaha. With thermite grenades, they destroyed the barrels, cutting off a deadly threat. On the beach below, engineers struggled to clear mines and tank traps while shells burst overhead. The cost was staggering, but by late morning, battered groups had begun to push past the seawall, turning chaos into a fragile foothold. Canadian infantry pressed inland from Juno Beach, advancing farther than any other Allied unit on D-Day. By nightfall, elements of the 3rd Canadian Division had reached the outskirts of Carpiquet, nearly 11 kilometres from the shore. The cost was steep, over 1,000 Canadian casualties in a single day, a toll recorded in regimental logs and remembered in every after-action report. Company commanders, many leading from the front, rallied their men through narrow lanes and fields thick with German resistance. The struggle for each hedgerow and crossroad was relentless. Yet the foothold held, battered but unbroken. The Allied High Command, sifting through casualty tables and field dispatches, began to shape the next phase. Planning for Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, accelerated as the beachheads joined into a single fragile front. The ground won on June 6th came at such cost. It became the launch point for the drive that would shatter the German line and open the road to Paris. The day ended not with triumph, but with the grim resolve of men who had survived the hardest test and knew that harder days still lay ahead. Across Normandy's beaches, courage shaped the fate of a continent, an alliance forged in blood and resolve. Today, the freedoms reclaimed there define modern Europe. As old hatreds resurface worldwide, this legacy reminds us liberty demands sacrifice and unity is still our strongest weapon. Thank you for watching.